Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Edward Trapunski, and as always, I'm privileged and honored to be the chair of the jury for the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards. And this is our 9th successful year. And the founding team who believed that we could do it, besides myself, were Judy Stoffman, Judy Gert, Sarah Horowitz, Alain Goldschlager, Michael Posner, and Adam Fürstenberg. Adam began the Canadian Jewish Book Awards in 1989, which was 33 years ago. And he joined the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards to keep the spirit of that going, and may his memory be for a blessing. These are difficult times. We're mourning the horrendous events where innocent civilians, children and women, were gunned down in their homes and in their beds. By being here, you're showing your courage and not giving in to the forces of evil. Thank you so much for coming. The Canadian Jewish Literary Awards is a celebration. It celebrates and recognizes and rewards the finest Canadian Jewish writing on subjects with Jewish themes. Some had suggested that perhaps we should postpone today's celebration, that we would all be too sad to celebrate. But wiser voices prevailed, and we were advised by our community leaders not to back down, that we should do our best to show our resilience and come together as a community and share the values and the creativity that define us. We've decided that in order to affirm life and hope, celebrating our authors could provide comfort at this difficult time. I grew up as part of a community of Holocaust survivors from Vilna. Every year, the Vilna Foreign would hold a memorial service for those 70,000 innocent souls, including my grandmother Fega and my aunt Sonia, who were shot down in the killing fields of Ponari. We took comfort from singing the partisan song written by Hirsch Glick. I'll give you a little piece of it. It's in Yiddish. It says, "Sollt nicht keinmal as du gehst am letzten Weg, holds Himmeln bleien verstellen bleie Tag, svete Putton unser Trott wir seinen da," which says, "Never say that this is the final road for you. Though leaden skies may cover up sunny days, our steps beat out this message. We are here, and we hope you find comfort." Once again, the Israel and Golda Koshitsky Center for Jewish Studies at York University is our main sponsor and our host. The center is a vital and gracious partner in helping us present the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards, and I want to recognize the valuable contribution of the center's coordinator, Julie Feinberg. She's always so accommodating and efficient, especially this year. My sister, Irene Bloomstone, died a couple of weeks ago, just as the crutch came for organizing this event. Julie stepped in to pick up the slack and make sure that everything was perfect. I want to say thank you to Julie. I want to introduce the president of York University, Rhonda Lenton, just to say a few words of greeting to us. Here's Rhonda.
I'll be brief. The 2023 Canadian Jewish Literary Awards are being presented at a time of existential crisis for Jews in Israel and around the world. They help us through this dark time by reinforcing our historical memory, reminding us of our resilience as a people, and prodding us to imagine a better future. They honor the current generation of Jewish scholars and writers, and with the establishment of awards such as the Irving Abella Award in History, acknowledge the seminal contribution of our literary pioneers. Above all, the awards proclaim loudly, Am Yisrael Chai. Thank you.
I want to welcome and to introduce Kalman Weiser, the director of the Israel and Golda Koshitsky Center for Jewish Studies at York University, for his welcome.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming today. It's a great honor for the Center for Jewish Studies at York University to host the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards. It is one of the many Canadian Jewish cultural events scheduled this year at York. But obviously this one is different. As you can imagine, and as Edward has told you, it was no easy decision to go through with today's program. Pain, sadness, anger, anxiety, depression have gripped us all in these last days, and we will continue to do so, to be gripped by these feelings for some time to come. We mourn the dead and pray for the safety of friends and loved ones. In these circumstances, it hardly seems appropriate to celebrate such wonderful achievements as those of the authors we recognize today. But I consulted with Edward, and he convinced me that it is more important to show that life goes on, to celebrate the beauty of the human spirit and the marvels of human creativity in the face of so much inhumanity. Above all, we must not be cowed by fear or immobilized by sorrow. I also received an email from one of my former students at York who made the same message abundantly clear to me. Yuri Kiyum came from Korea to study at York more than a decade ago. She is now completing a doctorate in refugee studies at Ben Gurion University in the Negev in Israel, very close to Gaza. She told me of all the mundane things people do, cook for each other, clean, even tell jokes, to keep their spirits up, and the myriad ways they help each other and ensure each other's safety. And I'll quote her, "Israel has taught me this for real. Life must go on and must be lived. This is what we do together right now, although or because we are dying inside. Therefore, humbly speaking, I think you must try to be fully present and, if possible, enjoy your time with your family. Writing you gave me a lot of a break, way more than you'd know. Thank you." I'm also reminded of the annual conference held by YIVO, the Yiddish Scientific Institute in New York, in January 1944. The organizers were themselves refugees from Hitler's Europe. They proceeded with the event despite their profound feelings of impotence and despair. They were confident that life, culture, and scholarship had to go on. But the audience of some 2,000 people at the conference also rose spontaneously to their feet to recite Kaddish, the traditional Aramaic prayer for the dead. In that spirit, I ask you all to rise and join me in reciting Kaddish for all those who have lost. יתגדל ויתקדש שמך רבה. בעלמא דברכותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי כל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב, ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם ולעלמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה, לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דאמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלום רבה מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום, עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. We are absorbed in the horrors of the current war in Israel and Gaza, but we must not lose sight of the fact that we are present here in Toronto. We must be thankful for the many blessings Canada has bestowed on us. I would therefore like to read a land acknowledgement. We recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaranto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. Thank you for your patience in a day of many speeches. Thank you for coming, and congratulations to all the award winners.
The Canadian Jewish Literary Awards grow in stature every year, and they become a cornerstone in the Canadian Jewish community's cultural calendar. Thanks to support from the Koshitsky Center and from the Jewish Study programs across Canada. I want to acknowledge our donors, our benefactors, our supporters, and the members of the community who have helped us through the years. Through the generosity of our patrons, we've raised the funds to sustain the awards program. Although these are challenging times, we're growing even stronger. We have created the Irving Abella Award in History as part of the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards. It will be given annually, supported by the Friends of this giant of scholarship who's left an indelible imprint on Canadian Jewish studies. Thank you to Rosie Abella for agreeing that this award is the appropriate tribute to the memory of Irving Abella. I think, and I hope you agree, that the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards is the perfect venue to celebrate the life and accomplishments of Irving Abella. The award recognizes the finest books with Jewish themes and subjects by Canadian authors in a variety of genres. They build pride in the creative achievements that reflect Jewish themes and ideas. Irving Abella was a writer, and the Irving Abella Award in History recognizes the best Canadian writing in Jewish history. Culture is a major measure of the vibrancy of Jewish life in Canada. The Canadian Jewish Literary Awards contributes to the health of that communal culture by promoting not just Jewish writers and editors, but Jewish ideas, creativity, and scholarship. Honoring the best books of the year in the various genres allow us to better understand ourselves and our collective past, our shared presence, and the uncertain world of our future. The Canadian Jewish Literary Awards had so many good submissions this year that the jury was hard-pressed to decide, but we discussed, debated, and persevered. The depth and breadth of the books we considered shows the vibrancy of the culture and the appeal of Jewish themes for fiction and nonfiction writers. While the cash value of the prizes we are giving out this year is significant for the writers, and we've doubled it, it's the reputation and standing of this jury that underscores its importance. I'd like to introduce the distinguished jury who worked so hard to narrow it down. Rona Ratto is the award-winning author of 15 books, 15 children's and youth books. Andrew Cohen is a best-selling author, an award-winning journalist, and associate professor of journalism at Carleton University in Ottawa. Mark Fryman holds a PhD in modern thought and literature. As a lawyer, he was Deputy Attorney General for Ontario, and he was the president of the Canadian Jewish Congress. David Kaufman is the J. Richard Schiff Chair for the Study of Canadian Jewry in the History Department here at York University. Anna Porter is one of Canada's most notable publishers and editors. She founded Key Porter Books. She's the author of 5 novels and 5 nonfiction books, including Kasner's Train, which won a Canadian Jewish Book Awards. Chantal Ringuet is an award-winning author and a translator from Yiddish to French. She's a poet. The book she edited about Leonard Cohen won a Canadian Jewish Literary Awards. And then there's me. Chantal and Rona are traveling and won't be here in person, but they'll be presenting on video. The Canadian Jewish Literary Awards is honoring 9 outstanding books for 2023, as well as a Special Achievement Award and a special citation. They are truly outstanding. You'll meet the authors later in person or virtually, and you'll hear more about their books. I just want to mention their names. The recipient of the first Irving Abella Award in History is Doris Bergen for her book Between God and History, Military Chaplains in Nazi Germany. For Biography Memoirs, the recipient is Moshe Safdie for If Walls Could Speak, My Life in Architecture. Absurdistan, Prague at the End of History by Derek Slater is the choice in scholarship. For poetry, it's The Most Charming Preachers by Gary Barwin. The fiction winner is The Ribbon Leaf by Laurie Weber. The Prisoner and the Writer by Heather Kamlott wins in the youth category. The Survivor, How I Survived 6 concentration camps and became a Nazi hunter is honored in the Holocaust category. In the Yiddish category, Yiddish Lives On, Strategies of Language Transmission by Rebecca Margolis is the choice in Yiddish. For Jewish thought and culture, Sarah Ronis is the selection for Demons in the Details, Demonic Discourse and Rabbinic Culture in Late Antique Babylonia. Simone Pierre Lacasse gets a special citation for Les Juifs de la Révolution Tranquille. Now that the business is over, we want to start with the Special Achievement Award. Andrew Cohen is joining me to present the award to Michael Posner. Michael Posner is the recipient of the Special Achievement Award for everything that he's accomplished to further Jewish writing and culture. Most recently, he published Leonard Cohen, Untold Stories, a definitive 3-volume biography chronicling the full breadth of Cohen's extraordinary life. Michael Posner is an award-winning writer, playwright, journalist, and the author of 7 books, including the Mordechai Richler biography, The Last Honest Man, which won a Canadian Jewish Book Award. This summer, I went to see Dead End, the mystery play he wrote that ran to rave reviews at the Harold Green Theatre at the downtown JCC. It was a tour de force. He was an editor and writer for Maclean's magazine, the Financial Times of Canada, and the Globe and Mail. How he has the energy and the time for everything, I'll never know. Most important to me, he's one of the founders of the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards. And Andrew has more to say.
Thank you. Leonard Cohen, Untold Stories is the culmination of a life contributing to Canadian Jewish culture, Michael Posner's contribution. And in 3 thick volumes of oral history, he explores and excavates and celebrates the lyrical life of Leonard Cohen. There have been, as we know, much exploration of that life in film, in documentary, in memoir, and in biography, but never something quite like this. Michael interviews hundreds in Cohen's orbit, from Montreal, London, Hydra, New York, Los Angeles, and the places in between. Relatives, friends, groupies, musicians, muses, managers, filmmakers, journalists, critics, spiritualists, classmates, bandmates, soulmates, and bedmates. Michael speaks to them all. Many had never spoken publicly before, and collectively offer a dazzling portrait of the tortured stylist, sensualist in that well-cut suit and black fedora, whose words and music resonate across the world some 6 years after his death. And in the popular search for Leonard Cohen, Untold Stories is a landmark. It's revealing, it's unsparing, it's funny, it's poignant, it's erudite. It's a study like no other. And it's a literary motherlode to biographers of the future who will be mining the work of Michael Posner, wondering how the light gets in. Michael?
Thank you, Edward. Thank you, Andrew, for those very kind and generous words. If even half of them were true, I'd be a very happy man. A deep thank you as well to all the other jurors. I know I know the labor that was involved in reading the 50 or 60 or 70 books that are submitted each year, a labor of love, of course, but labor nonetheless. Thank you, too, to the Israel and Golda Koshitsky Center for Jewish Studies here at York for its extraordinary and unflagging commitment to Jewish learning, Jewish scholarship, and Jewish culture. Thank you to the other patrons. I know you have been very generous to this organization, and we are all very grateful and should be. And congratulations to this year's winners. It's no small achievement in this current environment to be published at all, and to be published and honored for it. Mazel tov, you've just won the lottery. Now, I had thought I might spend a minute or two recounting a little bit about the origins of my not-so-little Leonard Cohen project, how it began, how it evolved, and my particular fondness for oral history and oral biography as a way to more fully grapple with the nuances and complexities of human character and human memory. But in light of recent events in Israel and the Middle East, and in view of the ever-darkening world that I think we all now inhabit, I thought I might say that my enduring obsession with Leonard Cohen and Mordecai Richler seems to pale in significance, as well it should. So what I'd like to do instead, with your indulgence, and I'll try not to wear out my welcome here, is talk a little bit about these awards, not my award, not Leonard Cohen particularly, but these awards and the importance of these awards. Because I think we might be forgiven for asking or attempting to ask, what is it that we're doing here today in Toronto, thousands of miles away from where Jewish lives are literally on the line as we meet? Does what we are doing, awarding prizes to writers and editors, lovely though it is, really matter very much? Does it matter to the Jewish people writ large? Or is this merely a self-congratulatory exercise, a kind of cultural solipsism? And I want to suggest to you very strongly that it isn't, that what we're doing here, small in scale though it is, with not much resonance really beyond these walls, matters a great deal. It matters because Jewish culture is an essential, inextricable component of our Jewish identity, as much, I would argue, as our holy books. If our identity is proud, free, fully realized Jews, secular or religious, is to survive, so I submit must our culture. And I don't care particularly how you define that culture. Today, of course, we are defining it by books, whether fiction or nonfiction, popular or scholarly. But you can define it by music or art or dance or art, architecture or language or film or all of the above. You can even define it by cuisine, if you like, by cabbage borscht and gefilte fish. Come to think of it, I could use some of that culture right about now. How important is Jewish culture? Well, let me remind you that it was culture and not religion that sustained the Israelites for centuries as slaves under the Egyptian pharaohs. It was culture that helped sustain the Jewish communities of Iberia under Islamic rule, also for centuries, and Jewish culture that helped preserve Jewish identity in Eastern Europe as more and more of our brethren abandoned traditional religious observance. And what was one of the first things that Hitler did when he came to power in 1933? He established something known as the Reich Culture Chamber, which oversaw film and music, theater, the media, literature, and the fine arts, and was designed to purge German culture of what they considered subversive, degenerate, decadent, foreign influences, by which they essentially meant Jewish culture. In Auschwitz, Treblinka, Bergen-Belsen, and other concentration camps, no expression of Jewish culture was possible. But in Theresienstadt, the Potemkin village Nazi way station to Auschwitz that they built in Slovakia, Jewish culture was allowed to flourish for a few years. There were concerts, there were plays, there were poetry readings and art exhibitions by the thousands. The ghetto library stocked 10,000 volumes. There were lectures almost daily on every conceivable topic. These were not only expressions of Jewish culture, they were acts of cultural defiance, courageous assertions of Jewish identity in the face of unspeakable horror and the ongoing nightmare of the Shoah. The paroxysm of barbarism exhibited by Hamas, and sadly, cheered on by pro-Palestinian demonstrators around the world, not only in Tehran, not only in Baghdad, but in New York and Los Angeles and Toronto, should be a wake-up call for Jews everywhere. The world's oldest, most pernicious virus, relatively dormant for some decades, has returned with a vengeance. Neither Mordecai Richler nor Leonard Cohen were particularly observant Jews, at least vis-a-vis ritual. But when the ugly face of French anti-Semitism reared its head in Quebec in the 1990s, Richler wielded his satiric pen to call it out. Cohen, for his part, studied Kabbalah and the Talmud, corresponded with learned rabbis, and was deeply versed in liturgy. Only weeks before he died in 2016, he exchanged emails with Judaic Studies professor James Diamond, a previous winner of one and possibly more of these awards. Diamond had heard Leonard's final album, You Want It Darker. And in the title song, You Want It Darker, Cohen had used the Hebrew word hineni, here I am, which most people thought represented Cohen's surrender to his imminent death. So Diamond, in writing to Leonard, and perhaps to give him some hope, noted that the word hineni also appears elsewhere in the Bible, notably by Moses. It's used by Moses at the burning bush episode. And you might have said that for Moses at that moment, it was the kind of start of a new career. And here's what Diamond told me. I'm reading now. Leonard replied in a long email, which just blew my mind, basically telling me, not in a bad way, but putting me straight, that he's accepted this being his imminent death. He can't even capture how happy he is. And he responded to my Moses spiel by saying, and this is really genius, Jim, as I recall, after Moses said hineni, didn't God sneak into his tent and try to kill him? And there is a very cryptic passage in Exodus, chapter 4, verse 24 to 26, in which an angel comes to kill Moses. That really put me in my place, says Jim, saying that he didn't really need any consolation. So Leonard Cohen, weeks away from death, down to 100 pounds, in excruciating pain, can still retrieve an obscure passage from the Bible to debate a rabbi with. In Los Angeles, in his final years, he used to go Friday nights to a Korean restaurant with his family and friends, and he would bring challah and candles and wine and say the blessings, and then have some Korean beef. The restaurant's name was, ironically enough, Shabu Shabu, and Leonard, of course, renamed it Shabu Shabbos. Our stories, these books that we are celebrating here today, are microcosms of Jewish culture. And our culture is at the very core of our Jewish identity. So whether it's a book about Moshe Safdie, or a powerful Holocaust memoir, or a poignant children's story, or rabbinic thought in ancient Babylonia, or oral histories of a Canadian singer-songwriter and a Canadian novelist, it's all of a piece. It's all connected, and it all matters. These Jewish-themed books and films and songs that we labor over for years are many things. They're a form of genuine nourishment, of course, intellectual nourishment, emotional nourishment, spiritual nourishment even. They're a kind of armor, not a fortress, not impregnable, not a panacea for the curse of anti-Semitism, but protection nonetheless against the enduring enmity of the world. And they are candles, small flames that we light to affirm our Jewish values. They illuminate where we have been, they illuminate where we are, and hopefully, book by book, film by film, song by song, They will help light the way, the Jewish way, for our children, our grandchildren, and future generations to come. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Anna Porter, and I am one of the jurors. And I have the pleasure and honor of introducing the Irving Abella Award for Jewish History. It recognizes the best writing in Jewish history, and it will be awarded every year from now on. This year will be the first year. For those of you who don't know about Irving Abella, he was an eminent historian. I think you've heard that already. He started 2 new fields of history in Canada, Canadian Jewish Studies and Canadian labor history. His books include None is Too Many, Canada and the Jews of Europe, 1933 to 1948, which he co-authored with Harold Troper. A Coat of Many Colors, 2 Centuries of Jewish Life in Canada, and many, many articles and many speeches. He was a wonderful speaker. His beautiful wife, Rosie, is here today. Irving was also the inaugural chair for the study of Canadian Jewry at York University, and he taught here for 45 years. He talked me into going on the board twice, for which I am still trying to forgive him. He taught the first course in Canadian Jewish history at a university. He was chair of Canadian Studies at the Schiff Professor of Canadian Jewish History, chair of Canadian Professors for Peace in the Middle East, chair of Canadian Jewish Archives, governor of York University, editor of Middle East Focus, chair of the Governor General's Literary Awards. I could go on for many pages, and in fact, if you look online, you will find that his honors and his achievements go on for many pages. I'd like my fellow juror now to present the award to the first winner in this auspicious category.
Thank you, Anna. This is the certificate for the Irving Abella Award in History, which goes to Professor Doris Bergen. And I just wanted to, if I just may, say that Between God and Hitler, Military Chaplains in Nazi Germany, which is an extraordinary exploration of the role of 1,000 Protestant and Catholic military chaplains who served in Germany from Hitler's rise to power to defeat, collapse, and Allied occupation. It's about, as I think you say, the mechanics or the mechanisms by which they did their work. It is a book that I think Ichi, as we called him, would have loved. He was a person of rigor and clarity and understood the moral questions and would have admired the kind of research. You were, I think, 30 years on this project. I think there are 60 or 70 pages of footnotes and bibliographic entries. My understanding is you scoured archives around the world and had a team of people doing it. This is the kind of archival, serious research for which there is no substitute, and Irving Abella did in his work. So it is a great pleasure on behalf of the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards to present this to you, Dr. Bergen. And there's a check too, which will come later. So the podium is yours.
I want to start by expressing my profound gratitude, first of all, to all of you who are here in this room. So many people who are really special to me, friends and colleagues, in this terrifying and terrible time. It means a lot to be physically together. Thank you so much to Edward and all the jurors for awarding this prize to me. To Anna Porter and Lionel Schipper for creating the prize. I also want to say a special thanks to the Koshitsky Center for Jewish Studies at York University, and especially Julie Feinberg, whose intelligent care in organizing this event is really remarkable. Thanks to Rosie Abella for her support, and it's a great honor to receive this prize named for Irving Abella, and to do so here at York University, an institution that meant so much to him. I want to tell you 3 things about my book, and I have even a title, I guess, for each one of them. One is about genocidal culture, one is about systems, and the third point is about sources. So to the first point, my book is about German Christian military chaplains who served the Wehrmacht, the German military, but it's really a book about the role of Christianity in the Holocaust. And chaplains provide a way in to this history, and they also played a key role. Christian military chaplains were witnesses to atrocities, including the mass murder of Jews. Their presence served to legitimate those crimes. And maybe the most important part of my argument, they played a central part in constructing a narrative of righteousness, a narrative that emphasized that it was somehow Germans who were the victims of the war, that it was German blood that served as a kind of sacrifice, purifying the nation like the sacrifice of the blood of Jesus. In this narrative, Jews were often presented as the aggressors in the kind of Judeo-Bolshevik idea, but often they were simply erased altogether from the story. This narrative is what I call genocidal culture, a system of thought, policies, and everyday practices that produces and sustains massive violence, that erases its victims, and that makes it possible for the people on the inside not to see the harm that they're part of. The second point is about systems. My book deals with about 1,000 Protestant and Catholic chaplains, but it is not so much a study of chaplains as individuals as it is a study of the institution of chaplaincy, the way an institution and its place in hierarchies of power shapes people and outcomes. It was not so much individual bad apples that were crucial here. In fact, the chaplains were selected above all on the principle that there should be no troublemakers. So not people who were selected for their fanatical devotion to Nazism, but rather people who would do their job quietly and effectively, and most of them indeed were trying to serve. But what I show in my book is the way that step by step their institution and themselves was compromised, developed certain patterns, what I call ruts of behavior, and under the pressures of extreme violence in wartime, they were stretched very thin, often with no time to think. And it's thinking that's the essence of ethical life. The centerpiece of my book is the chapter 4, titled Saving Christianity, Killing Jews, which deals with the summer of 1941 and the horrific explosions, the massacres of Jews in the recently invaded and occupied Soviet territories in those deadly months, July, August, September 1941. But it's the preceding chapters that deal with the years prior to the war itself, and also the following chapters that talk about how chaplains continued in their ministry after those events, that really show how the system came to be and how issues that in hindsight seem impossible, in fact, were not so surprising. The third point is about sources. Of central importance to my book are Jewish sources, which may seem counterintuitive. And indeed, when I first started this book, I thought the main sources would be chaplains' own reports and accounts. And those sources are important. I looked at many of them. But it took me a long time to realize that Chaplains' own sources are really inadequate because they reproduce the very narrative that Chaplains were part of. In order to see that narrative, I have to get outside of it. And what helped me to do that were a few factors. One was my involvement with the Center for Jewish Studies at the University of Toronto, and especially working together, teaching together with my colleague Anna Sternschus, who's here, seeing the importance of Jewish history in this history of Christian chaplains. I also really benefited from some fantastic research assistants among our students who know so many languages, so that I could look at sources in Romanian and Ukrainian, not just in German or languages that I could read. And finally, really important were developments in my field, the field of history, where changes in women's history, methodologies from Black and Indigenous histories have really taught us the importance of looking to silences in the archives and trying not to reproduce those silences in our work. So I think of the study as almost like getting inside the tunnel to see the chaplains, but to see the tunnel, you have to be both inside and outside. I think the use of sources is the most innovative part of my book, and it's what I hope makes it a significant contribution to an integrated history of the Holocaust. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is David Kaufman. I am here for the moment just to introduce my colleague, Chantal Ranguet, who is an author and translator who will be introducing our next book of recognition, Simon Pierre Lacasse's book, Les Juifs de la Révolution tranquille. Video, please.
This year, we received a great number of high-quality books in the fields of Canadian Jewish studies and history, so we had to make difficult choices. However, we hope to be able to do more in the future in the specific field of Canadian Jewish studies. For now, we would like to give a special quotation to a book in particular. Les Juifs de la Révolution tranquille regardent une minorité religieuse sur le Québec de 1945 à 1976 by Simon-Pierre Lacasse, published by the University of Ottawa Press, is an important contribution to the history of cultural pluralism in Quebec during the Quiet Revolution. The book is especially interesting since it describes a period during which Jews presented their own political and cultural claims to the French majority, thus redefining the nature of intercultural relations in the province. Based on archival research in 3 languages, Lacasse's monograph overcomes prejudices and unfounded opinions while nuancing the popular assumption that animosity and reluctance alone characterized Quebec Jews' reaction to the Quiet Revolution, revealing a more complex dynamics between Jews and French Canadians during this period of political turmoil. Congratulations, Simon-Pierre Lacasse.
Merci à vous toutes et à vous tous d'être ici aujourd'hui. Thank you to the jurors to have paid attention to my book, to have engaged with it, to have debated it, to have made it a piece of conversation within yourself, and to then make it a piece of conversation perhaps for more interested readers. Because what this book really is, it's a conversation. I come from outside of the community. So, of course, I had to make amends, make efforts to be part of a research community, but also to understand Jewish history, Jewish perceptions. And in some ways, this book shares some of the methodology, or at least the posture, of the anthropologist. I had to go through a process of learning Yiddish, learning European Jewish history, Ashkenazi, Sephardim as well. And it has been a conversation between the French-Canadian Goyische boy, undergrad at Concordia, who's meeting with very interested, fascinating Jewish scholars, and who learned something about his own society. what I've gained in the process of looking at Quebec history and Canadian history through Jewish sources is a better understanding of a city I love, of a society I love, and of conversations that can go beyond animosity. You know, Quebec history works on its own dynamics. It's something that Canadian politics is very well aware of. We have certain perceptions, certain ideas, and I think the role of the historian is to look at the way popular history is being vehicled, discussed, and to problematize it, to not necessarily to debunk. The point is not to revision to say something did not happen, but it's always very complex. And I think that my discovery, I've had a message with this book, both for my own community, if I can speak in those terms, and I want to say, and I have said to Canada, to French Canada and to Quebec, that the Quiet Revolution is something that's very large, hard to grasp, but that goes way beyond the borders and the frontiers of Quebec. And it's something that many communities participated to, those great changes that happened. The Jewish communities were an active part as well of changing Quebec in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and that's something that needs to be recognized to understand the diverse nature of Quebec today. But also that while it is crucial to study, to document, and to understand French Canadian and Catholic anti-Semitism in Quebec, it's also understand to look at the history of Quebec and Jewish relationships beyond anti-Semitism, because it is a nuanced, very complex dynamics, and there are some very interesting parallels and conversation that occurred in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and that I did not see in the literature that I was reading. So the Jews of the Quiet Revolution, the title is chosen. The Jewish community of Montreal was of this movement. They were an active part of it. They were in an active conversation with political figures, with intellectuals. And in that case, and in that particular context, they helped to shape the modern Quebec society that we have today. So I do hope that the book will get translated soon into English, because I do understand that there might be some challenges in reading French for some of you, at least. And I hope then that this is only the beginning of this important conversation. Merci beaucoup encore à vous toutes. Et puis aussi, je voulais remercier la communauté juive de m'avoir accueilli comme chercheur, comme personne non juive. Elle a toujours été très généreuse avec moi, très ouverte. J'ai rencontré de grands esprits, de belles personnes, et je me tiens avec vous aujourd'hui en tant que personne non juive, une semaine après des événements horribles, pour lesquels je suis extrêmement solidaire. En tant que personne qui chérit l'humanité, la vie humaine, ça m'a extrêmement touché. Et puis, je vous envoie tout mon soutien, tout mon amour et toute mon amitié. Merci.
When I phoned Moshe Safdie to tell him that he was the recipient of the Canadian Jewish Literary Award for Biography for If Walls Could Speak, My Life in Architecture, he expressed his regrets for not being able to be here today because he was in Israel studying the plans to update Ben Gurion International Airport, which he designed in 2004. Building an airport in Israel is a challenge, and even more of a challenge after recent events. If Walls Could Speak is a memoir about more than 5 decades of imagining and designing. This is a book of many parts, illuminating various aspects of his complex mind and his thoughts about architecture, geography, art, and life. He mentions many of his iconic projects, Habitat 67 in Montreal, the Wailing Wall Plaza in Jerusalem, the Yad Vashem Holocaust History Museum, and the National Gallery in Ottawa, and many more. Before you get too enthralled, he also designed Terminal 1 at Pearson International Airport in Toronto. It's a philosophy of Safdie's architecture and of his life. He writes in the book, "Life and architecture is bound together, and the principles that guide one as an architect cannot be separated from the principles that guide one as a human being." Here's Moshe Safdie's acceptance speech.
Good evening. I'm Moshe Safdie. I'm deeply honored to receive the Canadian Jewish Literary Award for Biography and Memoirs. This book has been brewing in me for several years, and ironically, it was COVID that gave me the opportunity, and I sat down and with the hope of sharing my 60-year experience as an architect, and I suppose the journey as a person that I went through from Israel to Canada to the United States and to many other countries in between. I wrote the book because I wanted to share this experience with architects, with lay people who are interested in architecture, actually with anyone who's interested in culture. I feel that architecture is a very misunderstood profession. What we do, why we do it, and the outcome, which affects everybody, is something that often is misunderstood. People think of it as more a matter of fashion. People think of it in terms of likes and dislikes. I hope that this book, for one thing, will give a deeper appreciation of what is a good building, what makes a building perform well, how do we assess it in terms of its impact on the quality of life, and what we as architects go through in an attempt to achieve it. The story is told through the experiences of specific projects, personal experiences. I touch on Israel, I touch on its impact on me, my return and work in Israel in the 70s and 80s until going on today. I hope that for those who read it, there will be some insight and pleasure. So much of architecture is explained in academic terms. Often I go to the reviews at Harvard or other schools of architecture and listen to the discussion about a design, and I, an architect, can hardly understand what's being said. So how would a layperson understand what's being said? I tried to tell the story of architecture through specific projects, through the experience. What is it like for an architect to be faced with the design of Yad Vashem, a place that unfolds the story, horrific story of the Holocaust, where architecture and the exhibits must resonate and become one thing, where there must be sympathy for the site, this most beautiful pastoral hill in Jerusalem. What makes such a design timeless so that it doesn't age and date itself? I look at Habitat today, it's 60 years old plus, and I think if it was built today, it would be as fresh and relevant as it was 60 years ago. And that's a long time. So what is it about the qualities of architecture that sustain it over time? Unlike those buildings that after a few years we recognize that whatever qualities might have excited us about them are temporary, not lasting. And finally, there's a question of just a building beyond its defined program. How might it uplift the spirit of the people using it? How might it raise their quality of life, their expectations, their contact with nature? And so that integration of nature, of plant life into architecture has been a central theme in the work as I explore in the book from project to project. And I hope that this kind of journey of how buildings and why they were made would be informative and hopefully enjoyable. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome back Gary Barwin, the winner of the Canadian Jewish Literary Award for Poetry for the Most Charming Creatures. This is the third time Gary Barwin has been awarded a Canadian Jewish Literary Award. This is the first time we've given him one for poetry. He won previously in fiction for Yiddish for Pirates, and last year for Nothing the Same, Everything Haunted, The Ballad of Muttle the Cowboy. Gary Barwin is one of Canada's best writers and certainly one of the most prolific. He's the author of 26 books and counting. He is a poet, composer, multimedia artist, and performer who writes in a range of genres, including poetry, fiction, visual poetry, music for live performers and computers, text and sound works, and writing for children and young adults. The Most Charming Creatures is eclectic and beautiful. With curiosity and humor, the poems explore the various registers of language and culture to bring out the marvelous with empathy and enchantment. I know of Gary's interest in language because he writes about Yiddish, and I sent him a performance of the first play written in Aramaic. I don't know if Yiddish and Aramaic informed these poems. Maybe they did. Here's Gary.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here with you all. I'm also very honored to receive this award for my book. I really deeply thank the jury and all those involved in making these awards possible. They're most charming creatures indeed. I'd also like to thank ECW Press for publishing it, Michael Holmes, the editor, and publisher Jack David. You know, I've submitted work to ECW a few times before, and Michael wrote the sweetest and most lovely rejection letters. This time, I'm really glad that he didn't. I'm grateful that these awards exist to celebrate writing, and specifically Jewish writing. If you turn a Jew upside down, writing comes out. Even if you don't turn them upside down, writing still comes out. A book seems a small thing in the vastness of the world. It has the same surface area as a plate or the cross-section of a brain. Auden famously said, "Poetry makes nothing happen." And Adorno wrote that it is barbaric to write poetry after Auschwitz. It seems the role of creative writing, and especially poetry, is always in question. But I like what American poet Charles Bernstein wrote in a poem addressing 9/11. The question isn't, is art up to this, but what else is art for? I think about the Kabbalist belief that letters existed before the world and that the world was made from letters. I feel that so too it is a writer's job to continuously remake the world with their language. Perhaps it could be that, like in the Kabbalistic concept, meaning has withdrawn, tzimtzum, to make room for us to make meaning, a kind of linguistic tikkun. And often with humor, to paraphrase Leonard Cohen, there's a wisecrack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Poetry is a kind of looking, of noticing, sometimes looking out at the world, sometimes looking in at the writer, or even at the writing. Poetry thinks about what does it mean to speak, to write. It asks, how do words, our own and others, influence us? How do they change what we think and see and feel? How does a joke or a metaphor remake the world? I believe that writing is always a conversation. It surprises, consoles, entertains, and energizes. The simple yet complex act of engaging us in dialogue is powerful. It wakes us up to the possibility of being human, of remaining human, of seeing other humans. It's easy for things to become business as usual, for us to become numb or inattentive. given the complexity and fast pace of the world. I think that's why Ezra Pound says that poetry is news that stays news. I agree with him, and I'd like to add that poetry is also poetry that stays poetry. It refuses to be anything but words. It refuses to be only words. Poetry makes us make poetry happen. I'd like to just read just a few little pieces from the book. Whale. Whale was balding. He was embarrassed around the other whales, so he hung out on the surface of the ocean, spouting sadly. Bird saw that whale was sad, and so he flew between sun and whale and covered whale's bald spot with his shadow. Whale had never been so happy. Then a warplane flew into Bird, and Bird was turned into feathers. Later, a warplane bombed a town, but Whale never found out, and so he remained happy until the end of days. Moral? Wear a hat and support journalists. Joy and sorrow. Joy, sorrow, and ape were siblings. They argued about everything. Since they were always fighting, they asked their mom to help. She tried all sorts of things, but nothing stopped the kerfuffle. So she locked them in their room. This way, they'll have to work it out, their mom said. Many things changed over the years. The alignment of continents, the acidity of the oceans, the climate. Ape evolved into an early form of human, but joy and sorrow remained the same. Moral, joy, and sorrow remain the same. Loss. I had a big toe. Now my big toe is gone. Suitcase, sunglasses, Hawaiian shirt. My big toe is gone. Traveling. I ask my remaining big toe, where has our big toe gone? My remaining big toe says, don't know, says, but I'm with you. I'm with you. And finally, after Hugh Thomas, life is long. Life is long. Don't worry, except for its sudden end. I mean it. Here we say something about love. Life is long. Foot falls, the war. But like I said, except for its end. Life is long. Don't worry. Don't. A sudden end means it was a rocket. Like a footfall landing on the ground, like maybe when you were running until the end. But of course, I miss you. I miss you. You're not here. And all I can do is walk. Thank you very much.
I'm here to talk a little bit about, promise it's going to be very little, about The Survivor, a book by Josef Lewkowicz, and Josef will join us, I hope, if the video works, shortly. He is in Israel, and thank God he's okay. The Survivor is an unbelievable yet true story of one man's endurance and his determination not only to survive the Holocaust, but to bring to justice those who perpetrated crimes against humanity. This is one of the great untold stories of the Holocaust. Josef Lewkowicz, who was the only one left alive in his extended family of 150, the survivor of 6 concentration camps, he became a Nazi hunter responsible for bringing to justice his greatest tormentor, the butcher of Plaszow, as well as the murderous SS camp commandant Amon Gut. Working as part of a covert operation, he also helped rescue hundreds of orphaned children who had been hidden by doomed parents during the ghetto clearances in Poland. Many of these children were able to begin new lives elsewhere. I hope you can show the video of Mr. Lewkowicz, and I think Maybe one of his relatives is here to accept the award? Yes, great, okay. So could we show the video?
Ladies and gentlemen, I stand here very humbled at receiving this award from you with a heart overflowing with gratitude, as I am honored with the Canadian Jewish Literary Award. I have asked my son Ziggy, to please represent me at this important event, to accept the award on my behalf, as the flight of 6,000 miles gets hard for a 97-year-old. This book is written by a living witness to the Holocaust, telling my own family tragedy, plus 6 million lives lost. I felt the need to write. We must tell, we must talk, we have to lecture, we have to teach now for the future generations, in order to remember, not to forget, the horrors of the Holocaust. In our days, we are faced with a wave of anti-Semitism, evildoers, deniers. We must fight them back now with all our means, in order it should never happen again. My thanks goes to my co-writer Michael Calvin and J. Roots Organization for bringing it to fruition. I thank God for granting me years and strength to be able to relate to the public my own sufferings under the Nazi regime, under their tyranny during the Holocaust. My sincere thanks to the committee for bestowing the award upon me. I feel very honored to be the recipient of this award. Thank you, thank you, thank you very much from the Holy Land.
Dear members of the awards committee, family, friends, distinguished guests. On July of 1926, in the hamlet of Czeluszyn, Poland, Simcha and his wife Shendel were very excited as they had just given birth to their son, who they named Josef Lewkowicz. As the child grew up, they moved to the big city of Krakow, where many members of their family lived on a street called Ulica Lewkowa, or Lewkowicz Street, named after his family. The street, by the way, still bears that name to this very day. When the Second World War broke out, my father, a young 13-year-old boy, was sent by the Nazis from one labor camp to another, as you heard. And throughout his imprisonment there, he trusted in God, ever knowing that God was watching over him. At the end of the war, as the sole survivor of his large family, he was determined to bring his captors to justice, and he did. After a great uncle of his brought him to South America, he met a beautiful woman from Colombia, who he married, and subsequently they moved to Montreal so that his children would have the opportunity to be brought up in the proper Jewish tradition. He spared us from relating his terrible experiences as we were little children and he feared we'd have nightmares from them. As my siblings and I grew up, he began to tell us what happened to him and to his family. Finally, he decided to put pen to paper, and he wrote what you can call his memoirs, resulting in his book, The Survivor. The main purpose of this book, as you've seen from the video, is to educate future generations, to combat the deniers, and to ensure that a Holocaust should never again, ever occur. Especially at this horrific time, my father's message is more important and relevant than ever. Having my son serving in the IDF brings it much more closer to home. I stand before you honored to accept your award on behalf of my father. To the members of the committee and the jurors, I wish to thank you for your wise decision in honoring my father's work today. Thank you so much.
The person who was going to present this award, unfortunately, is not here. She's one of our jurors, Rona, but I am delighted to be able to present the award because The Ribbon Leaf is a wonderful story. It was billed by its publisher as a young adult story, but in fact, it really works brilliantly as an adult book of fiction or a book of fiction for grown-ups. It's a wartime story of courage and of friendship. It's very briefly, it's a story of an Aryan German girl and a Jewish German girl who had been friends for a very long time as very, very young kids, had dreams of stardom together, as a lot of young girls used to do in the old days before they dreamt of becoming book publishers. And it was a time when being friends could be lethal to both of them. Kristallnacht hit in 1938, as you all know, and it shattered their friendship because the Aryan German girl's family were Nazis. Edie, the Jewish girl, escapes and ends up in Canada. The Aryan girl stays behind in Germany with her Nazi family, but she begins to feel very guilty about what's happened to her friend's family. And she makes the decision, under really deplorable circumstances and at the risk of her own life, to help her friend's father. And this is basically a very, very short, not terribly effective way of telling you the story, but it is a terrific story. I'm going to hold the book up, and I am sort of hoping that Laurie's friend, the book is by Laurie Weber. I used to tell every author I published, please hold your book up. Most of them are too embarrassed to do it. But please buy the book. And Laurie has a friend here who will accept, I hope, on her behalf.
Thank you so much to the organization and to the judges for this huge honor. The Ribbon Leaf began with my curiosity about Jewish and non-Jewish friendships during the Second World War, and about how war shapes childhood itself, perhaps because my father was a child in Nazi Germany and I could see the effects. My goal was to explore the everyday lives of Sabine and Edie growing up during this darkest of periods. I wanted to explore the parallels between the two girls, absent fathers, sick mothers, first loves, their growing pains and fears, but also their triumphs. And through it all, I wanted them connected by this special yellow ribbon that was a symbol of love between them. I did extensive research and read dozens of memoirs looking for those everyday details. I don't write with an outline, so the larger events of the war formed a loose framework in which to place the two girls, and the biggest challenge was keeping the book character-centered. I grew to love Edie and Sabine and carried them in my head and heart for almost a decade as their lives unfolded on either side of the Atlantic. It means a lot to me to be recognized by the Jewish community in Canada for this book. Growing up Anglophone in Montreal, I've always felt that the Jewish community lies at the heart of this city. Its famous people like Leonard Cohen and Mordecai Richler, its famous places like Schwartz's and St. Viator Bagel are quintessentially Montreal. This book allowed me to explore the city's rich Jewish history, and it means so much to me to know that I did this successfully. Months after the book was published, the Bag Street Synagogue, which features in my book, was defaced by anti-Semitic graffiti. This act reinforced for me why writing history remains important. Thank you so much once again, and I'm so sorry I couldn't be there in person to meet you all. Hopefully that can happen another time. Now I will read from Edie's first section of the book. It's 1938, days after Kristallnacht. Edie, who is 12, is going to her aunt and uncle's in Munich with her mother. Her father is hoping they can help Edie and her mom leave the country. I'm sitting on the train to Munich beside Mama. It's just the two of us since Papa couldn't come, and we're in third class on terribly hard wooden seats, surrounded by people who look as miserable as we do. I tell Mama I'm hungry and ask if we can go to the dining car, but she says, "No, Edie, not today." When I ask her why not, she says we're not allowed. When I ask her why not, she just shakes her head and pulls out some bread and cheese from her bag. All around us, people lower their eyes as if they know the answer to my question, but won't say. Going to the dining car is my favorite part of the trip. I love spreading the white linen napkin over my lap and picking up the heavy silver cutlery. It makes me feel glamorous and important, like my favorite movie star, Marlene Dietrich. "Stop asking so many questions," Mama tells me. "But that's not what Papa says." "Always ask, always question," he says. "Otherwise, you are a puppet and not a person." Except a few weeks ago, when I came home and told Papa that Frau Farber made me return the gold medal I won in gymnastics, Papa didn't question it. He just hung his head, and there were tears in his eyes, like there were this morning when we said goodbye at the station. So thank you so much again, everybody, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
The next award is in the youth category, and it will be presented by the absent juror, Rona Arato, by video, and then I will present the actual certificate to somebody who I hope is here to receive it.
Hello, I'm sorry I can't be with you in person, but it's my pleasure to introduce Heather Camelot, winner of this year's Youth Award, for her wonderful book, The Prisoner and the Writer. The Prisoner and the Writer is a powerful middle grade story of the Alfred Dreyfus affair. In 1895, Captain Alfred Dreyfus was accused of treason against France. He was tried, he was convicted, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment on Devil's Island. The writer, Emile Zola, who at the time was a very prominent writer, risked his career by writing a letter, an open letter, to the French press, J'accuse, accusing the military of convicting Dreyfus on trumped-up charges. The Dreyfus affair and the anti-Semitism that spawned it are introduced in beautiful verse and illustrations in this book. This book is a reminder that a person committed to truth, justice, and equality must stand up and speak for what they believe in and can make a difference. Heather, Yasher Koach on a job well done. And now it's your turn to speak. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Rona. And this is all very overwhelming on the best of days, but with the world where it is right now, even more so. To be honored for a book that stands up and speaks out against anti-Semitism, about a stranger who stands up and speaks out for another. Thank you to the Jewish Literary Award, the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards for this gift, to the sponsors and donors and jury who had a great many wonderful children's books to discuss and consider, some by friends and colleagues. I thank you for selecting The Prisoner and the Writer. I received an email from my publisher at Groundwood Books a few days ago. Karen Lee, who's at the Frankfurt Book Fair right now, wrote, "I just want to send you a virtual hug and to tell you how proud I am of the work you do to keep the focus on anti-Semitism and keep pushing hope and kindness and optimism into the world." And this really broke me. The funny thing is, I started writing because I wanted to create something that my reluctant reader of a son would maybe want to read. That turned out to be a novel by the name of Clutch, very loosely inspired by my father growing up in the Jewish ghetto of Montreal in the 1940s. It's hard to write about the Jews in the 1940s and not have a connection to the Holocaust. It's also hard to write about Montreal in the 1940s and not have a connection to one of the city's proudest moments, Jackie Robinson breaking baseball's color barrier with the Montreal Royals. Anti-Semitism, hope, kindness, and optimism, it checked all the boxes. I met Karen 5 years ago when I sent a picture book to Owl Kids, where she was editorial director at the time. It was just phrases about alternatives to war, like soldiers fighting with pillows and water balloons, and she loved it. And then she told me it wasn't for the picture book crowd. But Karen, being brilliant, said, "What if you wrote it as a middle grade nonfiction book?" And I, like any other author who had all of one novel under her belt, said, "What?" I've now published 4 middle grade nonfiction books thanks to Karen, including The Prisoner and the Writer, which also started out as a picture book, I might say. Most of these books talk about social change and advocacy, and in some way, big or small, anti-Semitism. I've never really been an advocate, except for my children. But something happened during that very first novel that set me on this course. I was still writing for the people who inspire me every day, my beautiful daughter and son. But I was somehow writing for me, like I was discovering who I was, who I am, and maybe who I was always afraid to be. Madeleine L'Engle, the author, once said, "You have to write the book you have to write the book that wants to be written. And if the book will be too difficult for grown-ups, then you write it for children." The Prisoner and the Writer is a difficult subject for adults and children, but change starts with children. My first introduction to the Dreyfus Affair was as a teenager. I used to watch a lot of late-night movies, and I saw the movie The Life of Emile Zola. It made a real impact on me, maybe because it was about anti-Semitism and hope and kindness and optimism. I'm just going to read a quick passage of The Prisoner and the Writer. I'll hold it up for Anna. We start here in 1897, sorry. While sitting on a hard bench at a school-sized desk, Alfred can read and reread the censored letters and collections of books sent by his wife, but he can't talk to anyone. He is the only prisoner on the island, a prison built just for him. What did he do? While sharing a meal at a senator's home, Emile can hear the story of the army captain sent away forever for betraying his country. He can imagine using the thrilling story in a novel, but he can't imagine that after all these years, this case is one huge, horrible mistake. How can that be? A spy for Germany, a traitor to France, a dirty Jew, certain French newspapers assure readers. An honorable man, a patriotic soldier, a victim of anti-Semitism, the French senator's guests assure Emile. Who is right? Who is wrong? At the lowest point of his life, Alfred has nothing left to lose. Guards follow him wherever he goes. They watch him day and night, even when he's chained to his bed, unable to move, unable to sleep. The prisoner can't stop the swarm of mosquitoes feeding on his skin, the insects eating his books, the poisonous spider crabs crawling in through the holes of his hut, the thoughts of death. At the height of his career, Emile has everything to lose. Thoughts haunt him wherever he goes. The more the writer delves into the prisoner's story, the more certain he is of the truth, the facts, so plain to see. An innocent man, a wrongful conviction, a biased press, a complete and total injustice. But if he fights for Alfred's release, the writer can say goodbye to the career he's built, the support of his fans, the life he's created, and quite possibly the life he breathes. When I read that to students, I then ask them, what will he do? I ask them, what would you do? And I ask myself, what would I do? I want to thank, of course, Karen Lee, mon amie Sophie Casson, an illustrator so incredible that she could bring to life the story about two middle-aged men who have been dead for 90 years and more. This is our book. Thank you to Groundwood Books and to Kirsten, who is here as a representative today. I have a whole bunch of friends here today, which is amazing. My critique group, Loretta and Jillian, you make me better every day. My mentor, author Gary Schmidt, who pushes me with kindness and humor. My friends, Charlene and Marcia, and my friend Sherry, who's not here, you all make me feel like I can do anything. My husband, Mark, and my kids, Juliana and Alex. I couldn't do any of this without you. Your questions, your honesty, your love. And I don't know what I would do without you in my life. My mom and brother, who are in Montreal, cheering me on as they always do, and to my dad, who passed away before Clutch, the book he inspired, was published. I know he'd be proud, and I know he'd figured out a way to take credit. Thank you again to the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards. Author Neil Gaiman once said, "A book is a dream that you hold in your hands." This book is a dream of a world without anti-Semitism or any kind of negative ism, a world where strangers don't tear people down, but stand up and speak out for one another simply because, like Emile Zola and Alfred Dreyfus, it's the right thing to do. Thank you.
So taking Anna Porter's words to heart, I've decided to do show and tell. Demons in the Detail. A book about demons, really? Many of us know about demons mainly through Yiddish curses. If you haven't been called a mazik, then you haven't grown up in a Jewish household. Most of you haven't grown up in a Jewish household. A mazik is a demon. So in more recondite circles is a shade or a ruach. But a mazik is really what you call a little kid who's a pest and gets into everything. That's what the rabbis were talking about when they talked about demons. This is a marvelous book because it teaches us how to think by looking at how the rabbis used demons as a way to think. And using the cutting edge in critical theory, the author, Sarah Ronis, posits that demons were used as tools to think. And demons were ways that the rabbis themselves fashioned categories of time, space, and the body. Not only that, according to the book, with profuse illustrations from anecdotes, demons actually were useful for the rabbis to formulate the very category of being a rabbi. And as we get into the book, which again, this is the book, go out and get it, we learn that demons are not in the rabbinic tradition as enunciated in the Talmud, single-mindedly negative characters. They're far more complex. They do many things that are surprising and in some cases even helpful. As we learn, surprises everywhere. And it is a book that really repays reading. It is written in a charming and accessible form, and I congratulate Sarah for a real achievement in Jewish scholarship.
Well, I'd like to thank Mark. I'd like to thank the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards and all its supporters, the Israel and Golda Kashitsky Center for Jewish Studies, the award jury, and Julie Feinberg. As someone who grew up in Montreal but currently lives in San Antonio, Texas, it's particularly meaningful to be able to continue to participate in the robust world of Canadian Jewish studies and to be a part of conversations with all of you here today. This book was a labor of love, not only my love for the subject, which I hope comes through, but the love and commitment of so many others for this project. I'd like to thank Aviva Arad, who first suggested that I look at, quote, the weird demon texts in the Talmud for a class I was teaching. Dr. Christine Hayes and the Yale Program for Judaic Studies for their support for the project in its earliest stages. Harvard Center for Jewish Studies and the team at University of California Press, especially Eric Schmidt, for supporting this project, even as the world shut down in 2020. I'd like to thank my family and friends and the many colleagues, deans, and students at St. Mary's University in San Antonio who have supported the project as I was completing it. If you found the book at all readable, it is because my students keep pushing me to speak and write more clearly on this and many, many other things. All of my work explores how the rabbis of late antique Babylonia defined who was a part of the rabbinic community and who they left out. How they explored the boundaries between us and them, whether those boundaries were ethnic, gendered, what today we would call species, or, as in Demons in the Detail, boundaries between the human and the more than human. And the case of demons is one which I think offers us a really robust example of how the rabbis of the Talmud don't always do what we moderns expect of them. Today, demons are depicted as malevolent, evil, and terrifying. All you have to do is go to any movie theater, especially right now in spooky season, and you can watch something about demons that will scare your pants off. But the rabbis of the Talmud see the entire world as created by an omnipotent and good God, and so insist that demons, properly understood, cannot in themselves be evil. And if demons are created by God and not evil, then perhaps they might even be good sometimes, or at the very least, neutral. So in my book, I explore the different ways that the rabbis of the Talmud complicate what we think about when we think about demons, looking at how the rabbis define demons halachically, legally, and how to deal with them, how they depict some demons as allies of the rabbis and subjects of the rabbis, and maybe even rabbis themselves. Someone who at first glance you would think is a them, it turns out is really an us, when properly understood. Rabbinic texts challenge us to question our own cultural expectations and assumptions, and think more capaciously and more creatively about ourselves and the world around us. My gratitude today is tempered by sadness. I'm holding space in my heart for friends and colleagues in Israel and Gaza right now, and all those experiencing sorrow and uncertainty. I pray for a lasting peace in the region and the world, speedily and in our days. Thank you.
It now gives me great pleasure to introduce the award for the category of Yiddish. The award has been given to Rebecca Margolis for her book, Yiddish Lives On, Strategies of Language Transmission. The Canadian Jewish Literary Awards has always held a special place for this particular category, in part thanks to one of the founders, the great Professor Adam Furstenberg. And this book is, we had a very rigorous debate for this category. It was one of the liveliest ones among the jury, and we elected to go with this book. It's a study of post-war Yiddish about the strategies that various sub-communities of Yiddish speakers, of native Yiddish speakers, of heritage learners, of new language learners have undertaken to engage with the language in rich and multimedia ways. It's a very detailed, careful study with all kinds of mixed strategies, a work of scholarship that's eminently accessible, and it really speaks to the ongoing vitality of Yiddish culture, of the Yiddish language. And so we're very proud to present this award to Rebecca Margolis. She is the Pratt Foundation Chair of Jewish Civilization in Monash University in Australia. She cannot be here today to receive this award, but she has sent us a video, which we will show, and you can photograph me with the award, unless she sent someone to pick it up for her. Do we have a claimant? Okay.
Dear friends, Taire Chaverim, Shalom Aleichem from Melbourne, Australia. Thanks to the wonders of technology, I'm able to share a few words to mark this occasion. Es ist mir a großer Kavod zu bekommen die Prämie für ein Buch, was es mir sehr nahe zum Herzen. This book marks the fruits of over a decade of research and more in thought as a response or a retaliation to the oft-spouted notion that Yiddish is dying or experiencing a revival. As a learner of Yiddish, researcher, and teacher of the language, I have never experienced the language that way. To my mind, the projects of the last 70 years to transmit Yiddish across Canada, whether it be family transmission, publishing, education, radical youth activism, theater, singing, music festivals, or new media, marks a remarkable feat of resilience and resistance after the near destruction of its European speakers in the Holocaust. This is a story of optimism, hope, and innovation in the face of a long history of catastrophe, and it shows that Yiddish is an open door with multiple entry points across Canada, globally and virtually. Optimally, I have found, these Yiddish entry points are participatory, inclusive, meaningful, and enjoyable, and the opportunities to engage with the language are ever expanding. In that light, I'd like to express my gratitude to the very many people who supported this project over the years. A herzlichen Dank euch alle. My family, my colleagues at the University of Ottawa and beyond, my many students, McGill-Queen's University Press, the Social Sciences and Research Council of Canada, and the many, many generous people who participated in interviews and in a Canada-wide survey for this project. Finally, and most significantly, I thank the workers for Yiddish behind the scenes, the tireless organizers of the Yiddish choirs and cultural festivals, educational and youth programming, clubs, theater groups, Yiddish social media projects, video sharing, and other arenas where Yiddish is made participatory, inclusive, meaningful, and enjoyable. These people ensure that Yiddish leapt, that Yiddish lives on.
And back to help us honor the final award for the afternoon in the category of scholarship to Professor Derek Sayer, whose book Postcards from Absurdistan, Prague at the End of History, is an absolutely stunner. It's a rich and thick set of very careful readings of erudite commentary and of stunning insight about a very wide panoply of cultural influencers, of artists, of intellectuals, and of the folks who made Prague in the post-war period inside and out. So I did not have a lot of background knowledge about post-war Prague intellectual life, and I learned an immense amount. And it's an absolute stunning book, an incredible accomplishment. It's the last of a trilogy of books that Professor Sayar has worked on for, I'd venture, over 3 decades, and a crowning accomplishment of an extraordinary career about post-war intellectual life in Prague and its diaspora. And the book includes an incredible amount of insight about its Jewish contributors to this remarkable culture.
Thank you. I'm greatly honored to receive this award. I'd like to thank all those involved, especially the jury, upon whom I've inflicted a very much longer book than I sat down to write in 2018. It's a real doorstopper. I'm particularly gratified, though, because I'm not myself Jewish, and Postcards from Absurdistan doesn't pretend to be a work of Jewish history. But it's impossible to write the history of Prague at any point over the last millennium without foregrounding the part that's played by Jews in that history. And it means an awful lot to me that the jury thinks that I've done their stories justice. Postcards from Absurdistan is the final volume in a trilogy of books which take Prague as an alternative vantage point on modernity, somewhere that gives us a different view than if we look out from New York or Paris or London. In his unfinished magnum opus, The Arcades Project, the great German Jewish critic Walter Benjamin nominated Paris as the capital of the 19th century and set out to discover the prehistory of modernity in the dream worlds which were incarnated in its material fabric and its cultural products. I thought that Prague might be treated analogously as a site in which to excavate the dream worlds of the very much darker 20th century. My subtitle, Prague at the End of History, is deliberately ironic because history was declared at an end no fewer than 3 times during Prague, Bohemia's 20th century. By the Nazis when they incorporated Prague into their 1,000-year Reich in March 1939, by the communists who proclaimed socialism achieved in 1960, and by many Western commentators who were confident that the 1989 revolutions in Europe heralded, in Francis Fukuyama's words, the universalization of Western liberal democracy as the final form of human government. Each of these was the illusion of the epoch, and each proved spectacularly wrong. Prague is where modernist phantasmagoria of history as progress have repeatedly unraveled, and the period covered in Postcards from the Munich Agreement of 1938 to the fall of communism in 1989 were the years of peak unraveling. Now, Benjamin provided a model in the Arcades Project and also a method that I very much followed in this book, which is the method of literary montage. I don't provide a continuous, overarching narrative. I work with fragments of one kind or another. I want to end what I'm saying today by simply taking one of those fragments. And it's one in which Walter Benjamin makes an appearance. This particular train of thought took off from an international exhibition of caricatures and humor, which took place in Prague in the spring of 1934 as a deliberate anti-fascist provocation. It was organized by one of the main characters in my book, the cartoonist Adolf Hofmeister. Let me at this point read. The exhibition drew protests from the German, Austrian, Italian, and Polish governments, not to mention that eternal censor of social morality, the Vatican. The Czechoslovak government ordered several works to be removed. The ensuing brouhaha ensured that the show had 60,000 visitors by the time it closed. All the leading Czech caricaturists of the time were represented. The most eminent foreign participants were George Gross, Otto Dix, John Hartfield, Thomas Theodor Heine, and Erich Godal. By then, Gross was already in America, and Dix had been fired from his position at the Dresden Academy, where later he'd be forbidden to paint anything but landscapes. Hartfield, Heine, and Godal had all arrived at Prague as refugees from Hitler in 1933. Hartfield and Heine moved on again in 1938. Hartfield to England, where he was soon interned on the Isle of Man, and Heine to Oslo, and then in 1942 to Stockholm. Godal made it to the United States, where he became a political cartoonist for Ken magazine and the New York newspaper PM. His widowed mother, Anna Marion Goldbaum, whom Godal had been forced to leave behind in Germany, was less fortunate. Finally given an exit visa in 1939, she was one of more than 900 Jewish passengers on the MS St. Louis, which sailed from Hamburg to Havana on the 13th of May. The ship was turned away from Cuba and was then refused permission to dock in the United States by President Franklin D. Roosevelt and in Canada by Prime Minister William Lyon Mackenzie King. A US State Department telegram sent while the ship was close enough to the coast to see the lights of Miami stated that the passengers must await their turns on the waiting list and qualify and obtain immigration visas before they may be admissible into the United States. The New York Daily Mirror published 2 letters from an aged mother on the wandering steamship to her son, an artist in New York, on 6th of June 1939. It is so strange how near and yet how cut off we really are, Mrs. Goldbaum wrote. The St. Louis turned back to Europe the same day. Anna Goldbaum was marooned in Belgium. She was deported to the death camps within a year. Plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. As the Western world faced another refugee crisis in 2015, the Nigerian-American writer and photographer Teju Cole remembered Walter Benjamin. Not so much Benjamin the scholar of surrealism as Benjamin the despairing refugee. The Benjamin who fled, like millions of others, for fear of his life, who committed suicide in 1940 in the little town of Pourbout on the Franco-Spanish border, rather than sent back to occupied France. The receipt made out to the dead man, the defunto Benjamin Walter, by the Hotel de Francia for the 4-day stay, included 5 sodas with lemon, 4 telephone calls, dressing of the corpse, plus disinfection of his room and the washing and whitening of the mattress. The itemization reminds me of 2 things, writes Cole. Less of the usual little list of what I drank or ate, mineral water, Toblerone, what I spent when I check out of these frequent hotels of my life. More of the little plastic bags I saw at the public morgue in Tucson, containing the last few personal effects of unknown travelers recovered from the Sonora Desert in Arizona. A few dollars, a few pesos, photograph of a family, a mother's passport to remember her by. These are the rags and the refuse, as Benjamin calls them, the dialectical images that condense the terrible recurrences of the past in the present, blowing Benjamin's phantasmagoria of history to smithereens. Every refugee is alike, but each generation fails refugees in its own special way, explains Teju Cole. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, these are the Canadian Jewish Literary Award honorees for this year. Thank you for honoring the best in Canadian Jewish writing for 2023. A replay of this afternoon's celebration gala will be available on the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards YouTube channel if you want to listen to some of these remarks again or tell your friends about them. We'd like you to partner with us. Building a more robust donor base would allow us to increase the value of prizes to winners, to attract more entries, to welcome larger audiences, and to do more to promote Jewish culture in Canada. Please buy the books we're honoring today and come to our website, cjlawards.ca, to donate. The Canadian Jewish Literary Awards thanks you.